I found a child in the woods behind my house. But she wasn't mine. She wasn't anyone's. At least, that's what we thought. Pause. Until we discovered she'd been missing for 3 days, and the only one who knew where she was a dog that didn't belong to us either. Let me back up because this gets stranger by the second. It started 3 weeks ago. Every morning at exactly 6:47 a.m., a German shepherd would appear at our kitchen window. Not in our yard, not by the fence. Right there, nose pressed against the glass, staring inside with these dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to be searching for something. My wife Rachel thought it was sweet at first. "Look, honey, we have an admirer," she'd say, laughing as she poured her coffee. Our daughter Emma, only 7 years old, would press her little hand against the glass from the inside, giggling as the dog's tail wagged frantically. But here's the thing, and this is what made my skin crawl. The dog never barked, never scratched at the window, never begged for food. It just watched, waited, like it was trying to tell us something but didn't know how. I'm a rational man. I'm a tax accountant, for God's sake. I deal in numbers, in certainties, in things that make sense on paper. So when Rachel suggested the dog might need help, I did what any practical person would do. I tried to shoo it away. I went outside with a broom, not to hurt it, just to encourage it to leave. The moment I opened the back door, the German shepherd didn't run. It took 3 deliberate steps backward, sat down in the leaves, and stared at me with an intensity that made me forget why I'd come outside in the first place. "What do you want?" I asked it, feeling ridiculous for talking to an animal. The dog tilted its head. Then it did something that changed everything. It stood up, walked 10 feet toward the tree line behind our property, looked back at me, and waited. It wanted me to follow. I didn't. Not that day. I went back inside, told Rachel the dog was probably lost, and said we should call animal control in the morning. We didn't. Because the next morning at 6:47 a.m., there it was again. Same position, same intense stare. And this time, Emma noticed something we'd missed. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve, "the doggy has a collar, but no tag." She was right. Through the window, I could see a worn leather collar around the dog's neck, but no identification, no owner information. Just a collar that looked old, weathered, like it had been there for years. That's when the first question mark planted itself in my mind. If this dog had an owner who cared enough to collar it, why would they let it wander alone for 3 weeks straight? Unless it wasn't wandering, unless it was looking. By day 9, the dog had become part of our routine. Emma named him Scout, even though we had no intention of keeping him. Rachel started leaving water in a bowl by the back door, and I started noticing patterns. Scout never stayed past 7:15 a.m. Never. He'd watch us for exactly 28 minutes, then turn and disappear into the forest behind our house, a dense stretch of woods that connected to the state park about 2 miles north. On day 12, Rachel suggested we follow him. What if he's trying to lead us somewhere? What if someone's hurt out there? I laughed it off. Told her she'd been watching too many Lassie reruns. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those eyes, the way Scout looked at us, through us, like he could see our hesitation and was disappointed in it. What would you do? Would you follow a strange dog into the woods based on nothing but a feeling? I decided I would. Tomorrow morning, I'd follow Scout and put this mystery to rest. Find out where he went, maybe locate his owner, and get back to normal life. Simple, logical, safe. Deep breath. I had no idea that decision would lead me to a missing child, a hidden community, and a secret that had been buried in those woods for over 100 years. Because when I followed Scout into the forest the next morning, I wasn't just stepping into the trees. I was stepping into a story that had been waiting decades for someone to finally listen. Let me tell you about Maple Ridge, the town where nothing ever happens, until it does. We'd moved here 2 years ago, chasing that picture-perfect suburban dream. Good schools, low crime, a backyard big enough for Emma to play in. Rachel had grown up in the city, and she was ready for quiet. I was ready for anything that didn't involve an hour commute each way. Maple Ridge promised peace, and for the most part, it delivered. Everyone knew everyone. The biggest scandal in recent memory was when the mayor's son got caught spray painting the water tower with his girlfriend's initials. But there was always something off about the forest. Our property sat at the very edge of the residential zone, where manicured lawns gave way to wild growth. Beyond our fence was what locals called the Old Woods, about 300 acres of state-protected forest that nobody really went into. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was just there, dense, unwelcoming. The kind of place where the trees grew so thick that even on sunny days, the interior looked like dusk. Rachel used to joke that it was probably haunted. I'd laugh and kiss her forehead and tell her there's no such thing as ghosts. But late at night, lying in bed with the windows open, you could hear things out there. Not scary things, just sounds that didn't quite fit. Rustling that was too rhythmic to be wind. Distant voices that could have been coyotes but didn't quite sound like animals. Once, about 6 months after we moved in, I swear I heard a child laughing out there at 2 a.m. I told myself I'd been dreaming. Now I'm not so sure. The morning I decided to follow Scout, I woke up before my alarm. 6:30 a.m. Rachel was still asleep, Emma too. I dressed quietly, jeans, hiking boots, a jacket, and crept downstairs. Through the kitchen window, I could already see Scout's silhouette in the pre-dawn light, right on schedule. He was sitting in the same spot, patient as a statue. When I opened the back door, he stood immediately. No surprise in his posture, no excitement. Just readiness, like he'd been expecting this moment for weeks. "All right, boy," I whispered, feeling both foolish and oddly determined. "Show me what's so damn important." Scout turned and trotted toward the tree line, not running, not rushing, moving at a pace that clearly said, "Follow me, human, and try to keep up." I grabbed a flashlight from the garage, texted Rachel a quick message saying I was going for a walk, and stepped off my property into the woods. The temperature dropped the moment I crossed into the trees. It wasn't dramatic, maybe 5 degrees, but it was noticeable. The morning sounds of suburbia, distant traffic, someone's lawn sprinkler, a dog barking 3 houses over, all of it faded into a muffled silence that felt almost deliberate. Scout moved with confidence through the underbrush, navigating around fallen logs and dense thickets like he'd walked this path 1,000 times. I tried to keep track of our direction. Northeast, I thought, deeper into the state park. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed something strange. There was a path. Not an official trail, nothing marked or maintained, but a definite route where the vegetation was worn down, where someone or something had traveled repeatedly. The path was narrow, almost hidden, winding between trees in a way that felt intentional, like whoever made it didn't want it to be easily found. "Scout!" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Whose path is this?" The dog glanced back at me, and I swear to God there was understanding in those eyes. Not just animal intelligence, something deeper. Then he kept walking, and I kept following. Because at this point, what else was I going to do? Turn back and spend the rest of my life wondering? We walked for another 20 minutes. My phone had no signal. The trees were getting denser, older, their trunks wide and gnarled like ancient sentinels. I was starting to think about turning back, starting to worry about getting lost out here, when Scout stopped abruptly. His ears perked up. His whole body went rigid, alert. And that's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold and my heart rate double in the span of a single second. A child crying. Faint, but unmistakable. Somewhere ahead of us, deeper in the woods, a little girl was crying like her heart was breaking. Scout looked back at me one more time, and then he ran. Not the careful trot he'd been maintaining, a full sprint, crashing through the underbrush with urgent purpose. And I ran after him, my accountant's body protesting every step, my mind racing with horrible possibilities. Who would bring a child out here? Was someone hurt? Lost? God, please don't let this be what I think it is. I burst through a thick wall of bushes and stumbled into a small clearing. Scout was sitting at the base of an enormous oak tree, his tail wagging now, looking up. I followed his gaze and almost fell backward in shock. There, about 8 feet up in the tree, sitting on a thick branch and sobbing quietly, was a little girl, maybe 5 years old. Blonde hair and tangled pigtails, wearing a pink jacket that was torn and dirty. And she was alone. Completely, utterly alone. "Hey!" I called up, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The girl looked down at me with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes so full of fear that my chest physically ached. She opened her mouth, and in the smallest, most broken voice I'd ever heard, she whispered, "I want my mommy." That's when I knew this wasn't just a lost child on a morning walk. This was something bigger, Saul. Something that was about to explode into our quiet town and shatter everything we thought we knew about those woods. But I didn't know yet just how deep this rabbit hole went. I didn't know that this little girl, whose name was Sophie Brennan, had been missing for 3 full days. I didn't know that half the state police had been searching for her in the wrong direction, 15 miles south of here. I didn't know that finding her would unlock questions that shouldn't have had answers. And I definitely didn't know that Scout had been visiting our window for weeks because Sophie had told him to find help, even though she'd only been missing for 3 days. How do you tell a stranger you've never met to bring help before you're even lost? Unless you knew you were going to be. "It's okay, Sophie. My name's David. I'm going to get you down from there, and then we're going to find your mom. Okay?" I kept my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking as I assessed how to reach her. The branch she was on was thick, stable, but too high for me to reach directly. I'd have to climb. Sophie nodded, hiccuping through her sobs. "Scout found you," she said, and my blood went cold. "Wait, you know Scout? This is your dog?" She shook her head, pigtails swaying. "He's not mine. He's—" She trailed off, looking confused, like she wasn't sure how to explain. "He's everyone's. He lives here." Lives here. In the middle of state forest, miles from any houses. That didn't make sense, but nothing about this morning made sense, so I filed that away for later and focused on the immediate problem, getting this child safely out of a tree. I pulled myself up onto the lower branches, testing each handhold carefully. The bark was rough under my palms, and I could smell the earthy dampness of the forest floor 8 feet below. "I'm coming up, Sophie. Just hold on tight to the trunk, okay?" She did as I asked, wrapping her small arms around the massive oak with a grip that suggested she'd been holding on for a long time. When I finally reached her level, I could see she was in worse shape than I'd initially thought. Scratches covered her arms and face. Her jacket was ripped in several places. One of her shoes was missing. And her eyes. God, her eyes had that hollow, traumatized look that no 5-year-old should ever have. "How long have you been up here, sweetheart?" I asked as I positioned myself to help her onto my back. "I don't know. A long time. I fell asleep and then it was dark and then it was light again and—" She started crying again, and I felt a surge of protective fury toward whoever had let this happen. Where were her parents? How had she ended up alone in these woods? Getting down was harder than climbing up. Sophie clung to my back, her thin arms wrapped around my neck so tight I could barely breathe. But I didn't care. Step by careful step, I lowered us both until my feet finally touched solid ground. Scout was waiting, watching, and the moment Sophie was safe, he pressed against her leg like a guardian. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. Sophie, listen to me. We need to walk back toward my house, okay? It's not too far. And then we're going to call your parents and— I can't go back, she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp with panic. I can't. They'll be so mad. I wasn't supposed to leave, but I heard the singing and I followed it and then I couldn't find my way back and— She was hyperventilating now, working herself into a state. Hey, slow down. I knelt in front of her, hands on her tiny shoulders. Nobody's going to be mad. Your parents are probably just worried sick. They'll be so happy to see you. I was saying what any adult would say to a lost child, but something about her reaction didn't fit. The fear in her eyes wasn't the normal fear of being in trouble. It was deeper, more complicated. You don't understand, Sophie whispered, glancing around the clearing like she was afraid someone might hear. I'm not supposed to be found. Not by people from outside. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Outside? Sophie, what do you mean, outside? But before she could answer, Scout's head snapped toward the north. His ears went flat against his skull, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, the first sound I'd heard him make. He positioned himself between us and the direction he was staring, his body tense and ready. Someone's coming, Sophie breathed, and I heard it too. Footsteps. Multiple people moving through the brush with purpose. For a split second, relief flooded through me. Maybe it was a search party. Maybe Sophie's parents had been looking for her all night. But then I saw the look of absolute terror on Sophie's face, and I realized this wasn't a rescue. This was something else entirely. 3 figures emerged from the tree line. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in what I can only describe as old-fashioned clothing, not costume-level old, but wrong for 2024. The woman wore a long skirt and a shawl. The men had beards and wore heavy work shirts like something out of a historical photograph. They looked to be in their 30s or 40s, weathered by outdoor living, and every single one of them stopped dead when they saw me. The silence that followed was the most uncomfortable of my life. They stared at me. I stared at them. Scout kept growling. And Sophie grabbed my hand and squeezed so hard it hurt. You shouldn't be here, the taller man finally said. His voice was deep, careful, like he was choosing each word with precision. This is private land. I don't think it is, I stammered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. This is state forest, public property, and I found this little girl who appears to be lost. So if she belongs to you, then— She doesn't belong to anyone, the woman cut me off, but her eyes were locked on Sophie with an expression I couldn't quite read. She belongs with us. There's a difference. Are you her mother? I asked, already knowing the answer was going to complicate things. The woman hesitated. It's not that simple. Actually, it is simple, I said, feeling my protective instincts override my confusion. A 5-year-old child was alone in a tree, crying after apparently being lost in the woods. That's a situation that involves calling the authorities, getting her checked by a doctor, and reuniting her with her family. So unless one of you can prove you're her legal guardian right now, I'm taking her back to my house and calling— You call the police and you'll destroy everything, the shorter man interrupted. His voice urgent now. You don't understand what you've walked into, friend. This isn't about one lost child. This is about— He stopped abruptly as the woman shot him a warning look. About what? I demanded. Sophie was trembling against my leg now, and Scout had stopped growling but remained tense and alert. Who are you people? What is this place? The 3 strangers exchanged glances, having some silent conversation I wasn't privy to. Finally, the tall man sighed, a sound of deep resignation. My name is Thomas. This is my sister Anne, and that's Marcus. And you've just stumbled onto something that's been hidden in these woods for 117 years. A community, a way of life. A secret that 32 families have kept from the outside world since 1907. My brain struggled to process what he was saying. A hidden community? In the middle of state forest in Pennsylvania, less than 3 miles from a suburban neighborhood? That was impossible. That was insane. But as I looked at their clothing, their weathered faces, the way they stood with a mixture of defiance and fear, I realized Thomas wasn't lying. He was telling me the impossible truth. And Sophie, little Sophie with her pink jacket and missing shoe, she wasn't lost in the woods. She lived in them. With people who'd been hiding from the modern world for over a century. Jesus Christ, I breathed. You're telling me there's a whole... What? A village out here? How is that even possible? How has no one... Because we're very, very careful, Anne said quietly. Because we stay hidden. Because we follow the rules that have kept us safe for generations. And because children like Sophie... She looked at the girl with something like sorrow. Children like her know never to wander beyond the boundaries, never to expose themselves, never to make contact with outsiders. She didn't say, until now, but it hung in the air between us anyway. Sophie started crying again, and I realized this little girl was caught between two worlds, the one she'd been born into and the one she'd accidentally revealed. What kind of life had she been living out here? What kind of community operated in complete secrecy in the 21st century? And most importantly, what were these people going to do now that I'd discovered them? Thomas took a step forward, his hand extended in a gesture that might have been friendly under different circumstances. David, that's your name, right? I heard you tell Sophie. David, I'm going to ask you to make a choice right now. A choice that's going to affect a lot of lives, including your own. You can come with us, see what we've built, understand why we live the way we do, and then decide if you want to expose us to the authorities, or... His expression hardened slightly. You can try to leave with Sophie right now, and we'll do what we've always done when our secret is threatened. We'll disappear. Within hours, there will be no trace of us, and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to convince people you're not crazy, because we're very good at vanishing. That sounds like a threat, I said, pulling Sophie closer to me. Scout positioned himself more firmly between us and the strangers, and I was grateful for his presence, even if he was just a dog. Just a dog who'd been trying to tell me about Sophie for 3 weeks, who'd known exactly where to find her, who clearly belonged to this hidden community and had somehow understood that this little girl needed outside help. It's not a threat, Anne said softly. It's just the truth. We've survived this long by being willing to let go of everything when necessary. Homes, gardens, things we've built over generations. We'll burn it all and scatter if we have to. It's happened twice before in our history. We'll do it again. Her eyes met mine, and I saw genuine sadness there. But we'd rather not. We'd rather you understand. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, a sound so normal it felt surreal against the impossibility of this conversation. I looked down at Sophie, who was staring up at me with those huge, frightened eyes, and I realized I was standing at a crossroads that would define not just my morning, but possibly my entire life. Go home, call the police, expose this community, and watch these people vanish like smoke? Or follow them deeper into the woods, into a secret that had been kept for over a century, and risk what? My safety? My family's safety? My sanity? What would you do? Would you trust your gut, or would you trust the authorities? Would you follow strangers into the woods based on nothing but a scared child and a mysterious dog? I made my choice. God help me, I made my choice. I'll come with you, I heard myself say. But I need to text my wife first. I need to tell her I'm okay, or she'll call the police herself, and this whole thing becomes moot. Thomas considered this, then nodded slowly. Fine. But you tell her you're following up on the lost dog. Tell her you might be a while. Nothing more. And once we're back to our settlement, there's no cell service anyway. The geography blocks the signal, one of the reasons we chose this location. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and typed out a message to Rachel. Following Scout to find his owner. Might be a while. Don't worry. Love you. I hit send, watched the message turn blue as it delivered, and then pocketed my phone. I'd just lied to my wife for the first time in our marriage. All to follow 3 strangers and a mysteriously intelligent dog deeper into the woods, toward a community that shouldn't exist. And as we started walking, Sophie's small hand in mine, Scout leading the way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a threshold I could never uncross, that whatever I was about to see would change my understanding of the world forever. But here's what really terrified me. Sophie had said Scout told her to find help. She'd said she heard singing that led her away from her community, and she'd been in that tree for what sounded like more than one night. But according to Thomas and Anne, she'd only been missing for... Wait. I stopped walking, my brain finally catching up to the timeline. How long has Sophie been gone? I asked abruptly. How long have you been searching for her? The 3 adults exchanged uncomfortable looks. Finally, Marcus answered, his voice tight. 3 days. She disappeared 3 days ago during the morning lessons. We've had everyone searching. But the woods are vast, and Sophie's small, and... That's impossible, I interrupted. Scout's been coming to my window for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Every morning at the same time. He's been trying to tell me about Sophie for 3 weeks, but she's only been missing for 3 days. So either you're lying about the timeline or... I stopped, my own words catching up to me. Or Scout had known Sophie was going to go missing, had known before it happened, had started trying to get help weeks in advance, which meant this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a child wandering off. This was planned, orchestrated. Someone had known Sophie would disappear. Someone had sent Scout to prepare a rescue. And that someone might still be out here in these woods, watching us right now. The settlement appeared gradually, like a mirage resolving into reality as we walked deeper into the forest. At first, I saw only carefully camouflaged structures, tents and lean-tos covered in branches and leaves, virtually invisible unless you knew what to look for. Then came the gardens, small plots of vegetables tucked into clearings with precision, and finally, as we rounded a dense thicket of pines, the main village revealed itself. I stopped walking, my mouth falling open. There were buildings, real buildings, log cabins and wooden structures arranged in a loose circle around a central common area. Smoke rose from several chimneys. Chickens scratched in a pen. A handful of children, maybe 6 or 7 of them, played with wooden toys near what looked like a schoolhouse. Solar panels lay hidden under camouflage netting on several roofs, the only concession to modern technology I could immediately see. And everywhere, were people dressed like they'd stepped out of a century-old photograph. 30 or 40 individuals at least, maybe more, all stopping mid-task to stare at me, the outsider, being led into their secret world by Thomas and his group. How... I couldn't even formulate the question. How has no one ever found this place? Satellites? Drones? Hikers? Satellites see trees and camouflage netting, Thomas explained, his voice matter of fact. Drones are illegal to fly in state forest without permits, and the few that have wandered through see the same thing. As for hikers, he gestured to the children, who'd stopped playing to watch us. We're very, very quiet. We use sentries. We know every trail, every access point, every ranger patrol route. When outsiders come close, we simply disappear into the trees, become invisible, wait them out. A woman detached from a group near one of the cabins and ran toward us, her face a mixture of desperate hope and disbelief. "Sophie! Oh my God, Sophie!" She fell to her knees in front of the little girl, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Sophie burst into fresh tears, clutching her mother like she'd never let go. So this was Sophie's mother. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with the same blonde hair as her daughter and eyes red from what looked like days of crying. She examined Sophie frantically, checking for injuries, whispering words of comfort and relief. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something unexpected flash across her face. Fear. "You brought an outsider here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an accusatory weight that made me flinch. "Thomas, what were you thinking?" "The rules," Thomas interrupted firmly, "don't account for every situation, Kate. This man found your daughter alone in the woods. He was going to call the authorities. We had to make a choice." Kate's eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded, pulling Sophie closer. "Where was she?" "We searched everywhere, called for her until our voices gave out." 3/4 of a mile northwest, up in the old Sentinel Oak," Thomas said. "Beyond our normal boundary. Someone must have been watching over her to keep the predators away for 3 days." At his words, several people in the growing crowd glanced at Scout, who'd positioned himself near Sophie and Kate with proprietary alertness. An elderly man with a long white beard nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "The forest protects its own," he said in a voice that sounded like rustling leaves. I felt like I'd walked into a fever dream. "Okay, I need someone to explain what's happening here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "All of it. From the beginning. Because I've just discovered an illegal settlement in state forest and a child who's been missing for 3 days, and a dog who apparently knew about it weeks in advance, and people who dress like they're in a historical reenactment, and I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not crazy," a woman's voice said from behind me. I turned to find myself face to face with someone who looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that held more wisdom than anyone I'd ever met. "You're just the first outsider in 60 years to be invited in. My name is Eleanor. I'm the eldest of our community, and I suppose I'm the one who owes you an explanation." She gestured to a bench near the central fire pit, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, to call for help, to get back to my normal life, I sat, because at this point, I was in too deep to turn back. I needed to understand. Eleanor settled beside me with a grace that belied her age. Around us, the community continued their daily routines, but I could feel their attention focused on this conversation. "Our settlement began in 1907, Eleanor started, when 23 families fled what they called the corrupting influence of industrial society. They weren't religious extremists or criminals, they were idealists, teachers, farmers, craftspeople who believed the world was heading in a wrong direction and wanted to preserve a simpler way of life." "That was over 100 years ago," I interjected. "The world has changed. There are laws now, regulations, property rights." "Which is precisely why we've stayed hidden," Eleanor said patiently. "We know we're technically squatters on state land. We know our lifestyle violates numerous modern regulations, but we also know something the outside world seems to have forgotten. It's possible to live without destroying everything around you. We have no debt, no pollution, no addiction to technology that separates us from each other and from nature. We teach our children to read and write and think, but also to farm and build and live in harmony with the forest. We're not criminals, David. We're just different." It was a compelling speech, and part of me, a surprisingly large part, could understand the appeal. Who hadn't fantasized about escaping the rat race, The constant noise, the feeling of being a cog in a machine. But there were massive problems with this picture. "What about medical care?" I challenged. "What happens when someone gets seriously ill? When someone needs surgery or chemotherapy or—" "We have 2 people with medical training," Eleanor replied calmly. "And yes, when we face something beyond our capabilities, we make exceptions. 3 years ago, Marcus's wife needed an emergency C-section. Thomas drove her to the nearest hospital, told them they'd been camping when she went into labor. The baby and mother survived. We adapt when we must. And children? They don't get a choice about being born into this life. Don't they deserve to know about the outside world? To make their own decisions about, like Sophie did?" Kate's voice was sharp as she approached with her daughter. Sophie had stopped crying but was clinging to her mother's leg with the grip of someone who'd faced something terrifying and survived. "My daughter knows about the outside world, Mr. Rivers, David Rivers. Mr. Rivers. Sophie knows about cars and phones and computers because we're not ignorant zealots. We teach our children about modern society. And when they turn 18, they're given a choice. Stay with us or leave and build a life out there. About 40% choose to leave. The rest choose to stay, knowing what they're giving up and what they're preserving. But that's not what I'm worried about right now," Kate continued, her voice dropping to something quieter and more frightened. "What I'm worried about is how Sophie ended up beyond our boundaries in the first place, and what she keeps saying about the singing." That got everyone's attention. The background noise of the settlement dimmed as people moved closer, forming a loose circle around us. Thomas's expression darkened. Even Eleanor looked troubled. "Sophie," I said gently, crouching down to her level. "Can you tell me about the singing? What did you hear?" Sophie's eyes went wide, and she pressed her face against her mother's leg for a moment before speaking in a small voice. "It was so pretty. Like music, but not like any music we make here. It was—" She struggled to find words. "It was like the forest was singing, and it kept saying, 'Come find me, over and over,' and I couldn't help it, Mama. I had to follow." A cold chill ran down my spine, and I saw my own unease reflected on the faces around me. That didn't sound like a child's imagination. That sounded like something else entirely. "Did anyone else hear this singing?" I asked the group. "Anyone at all?" Silence. Heads shook. Kate's grip on Sophie tightened. "But," the elderly man with the white beard spoke up, "Scout heard it. Didn't you, boy?" He looked at the German shepherd, who responded with a soft whine. "Scout's been agitated for weeks, pacing, whining, leaving the settlement at odd hours. We thought he was tracking a deer or following a scent trail, but he was following something else, wasn't he?" "He was following the singing to me," Sophie said simply. "And then when I got lost, he promised he'd find help. He told me to climb the tree and wait, and he'd bring someone. So I did." The world tilted slightly as I processed what this 5-year-old was saying. A dog had promised to find help. A dog had communicated complex instructions to a child. A dog had executed a rescue plan that involved weeks of patient waiting at a stranger's window. None of that was possible. Dogs didn't have that level of cognitive ability. Dogs didn't make promises or execute elaborate plans. Unless— "What is Scout?" I asked slowly, looking at the German shepherd who was now sitting calmly between Sophie and Kate, his intelligent eyes fixed on me. "Because he's not just a dog, is he? There's something different about him." Eleanor sighed, a sound that carried decades of secrets. "Scout came to us about 7 years ago. Just walked into our settlement one day like he'd always belonged here. No collar, no obvious owner, but clearly domesticated. We tried to find where he'd come from, but he had no chip, no identification. So we let him stay. And over time, we realized he was special. More intelligent than any animal we'd encountered. protective of the children in ways that went beyond normal pack instinct. Almost like he understood not just our emotions, but our words, our intentions. Some of us believe he's a guardian spirit, the white-bearded man added. A protector sent by the forest itself. Others think he's just an exceptionally well-trained dog with a previous life we'll never know about. But everyone agrees. Scout has saved lives. He's warned us about threats, found lost children, even alerted us to a fire before it could spread through the settlement. He's one of us. I looked at Scout, who tilted his head and gazed back with those impossibly knowing eyes, and I felt like I was staring into something ancient and unknowable. He knew, I said slowly. 3 weeks before Sophie disappeared, he knew she'd be in trouble. He started coming to my window to prepare me. How is that possible? Maybe he didn't know the future, Thomas suggested carefully. Maybe he knew the present. Maybe he sensed whatever was luring Sophie away was already active, already dangerous. And he was trying to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Something in these woods is calling children? I asked, my voice rising with alarm. And you're all just accepting that? You're not investigating? You're not trying to find the source? We have been investigating, Anne said quietly. For 3 days we've been searching every inch of our territory and beyond. But we found nothing. No signs of human presence, no animal dens, nothing that explains what Sophie heard. It's like the singing came from nowhere and disappeared just as mysteriously. But that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part was what Sophie said next, in a voice so matter-of-fact that it took a moment for the full horror of her words to sink in. It wasn't the first time the singing tried to take me. It's been calling me for a long time. I just couldn't resist it anymore. The settlement exploded into arguments. You knew? Kate's voice cracked with betrayal and fear. Sophie, you knew you were being, what, lured? And you didn't tell me? You didn't tell anyone? Her hands were shaking as she gripped her daughter's shoulders, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to convey the depth of her terror. Sophie's tears started again, streaming down her dirty cheeks. I tried to tell you. I said I heard music in the forest, remember? But you said I was imagining things, that I was just hearing wind in the trees. And I thought maybe you were right. Maybe I was making it up, but it kept getting louder and prettier and... She dissolved into sobs, and Kate pulled her close, her own face crumpling with guilt. Around us, the community fragmented into heated discussions. Thomas was arguing with Marcus about patrol schedules. Anne was demanding answers from the white-bearded elder about historical records of similar incidents. Several parents were calling their own children over, asking quietly if they'd heard anything unusual. The atmosphere shifted from curious calm to barely controlled panic in the space of 30 seconds. I stood in the middle of it all, feeling massively out of my depth. This wasn't just about a hidden community anymore. This was about children being targeted by something none of us understood. And I was the outsider who'd stumbled into their crisis without any authority or knowledge to help. But I did have something they didn't. A connection to the outside world. Resources. Information. Technology. Listen to me, I shouted over the chaos. My accountant's voice, used to commanding attention in boardroom meetings, cut through the arguments. Listen! Everyone just stop and listen for a second. The settlement fell into an uneasy silence. Dozens of eyes turned to me, some grateful for the interruption, others clearly resentful of an outsider taking control. I understand this is your home, your community, your crisis, I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. But you've been dealing with this in isolation for 3 days and gotten nowhere. You need help. Real help. Medical professionals who can examine Sophie for signs of trauma or drugging or whatever might have happened to her. Experts who can investigate the forest. Search teams with modern equipment. Thermal cameras, drones, trained dogs. Absolutely not, Thomas cut me off, his voice hard. The moment we allow outsiders in, We lose everything. The media would have a field day. Hidden community discovered in state forest. We'd be forced off this land, prosecuted for trespassing, have our children taken by social services, everything our ancestors built, everything we've preserved, gone in an instant because of one crisis. One crisis? I shot back, anger flaring. A child was missing for 3 days, and according to Sophie, whatever took her has been stalking her for longer. What happens when it comes back? What happens when it targets another child? How many kids have to disappear before you admit you need outside help? He's right. Eleanor's quiet voice somehow carried more authority than all our shouting. She stood slowly, and I watched the entire community shift their attention to her with a respect that bordered on reverence. I know what you're all thinking. I know you're afraid of losing this life we've built. But Thomas, Marcus, Anne, remember the founding principles. We came here to escape corruption, yes, but we also came here to protect the innocent, to live with honor. If we put our secrecy above Sophie's safety, above the safety of all our children, then we've already lost what makes this community worth preserving. The settlement fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could see the internal conflict playing out on faces, the desire to maintain their hidden sanctuary warring with the very real fear that their children were in danger. Thomas's jaw clenched. What are you proposing, Eleanor? That we just open our gates? Invite the authorities in and hope for mercy? I'm proposing, Eleanor said carefully, that we allow David to investigate. He's already here. He's already seen us. And perhaps most importantly, Scout chose him. That has to mean something. All eyes shifted to me, and I felt the weight of their combined desperation and suspicion. I'm not a detective, I said quickly. I'm an accountant. I do taxes for small businesses. I have absolutely no qualifications for— But you have access, Anne interrupted. You can research without raising alarms. You can ask questions in town without exposing us. You can search records and databases that we can't access without revealing ourselves. You're our bridge to the outside world. And if you help us, Thomas added, his tone shifting from hostile to calculating, we'll make sure you have compelling reasons to keep our secret. We're not without resources, David. We may live simply, but several of our members came from wealthy families before choosing this life. We can make it worth your while. I don't want your money, I said immediately. And I meant it. Whatever moral murkiness existed in this situation, I didn't want to be bribed into silence. But I do want answers. About Sophie, about the singing, about Scout, and— I paused, realizing something that had been nagging at me since we'd arrived. About why you're all so scared of something you claim doesn't exist. Eleanor's eyes met mine, and I saw something there. A shadow of old fear, old knowledge. Who said it doesn't exist? She asked softly. We said we found no evidence. That's not the same thing. The hair on my neck stood up. You know something, don't you? About what's in these woods? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, and I watched an entire conversation happen in the glances she exchanged with the oldest members of the community. Finally, she nodded, as if coming to a decision. Come with me, David. There's something I need to show you. Something we don't speak about, even among ourselves, because some fears are better left in the dark. She turned and walked toward a cabin at the far edge of the settlement, smaller than the others, more weathered, with symbols carved into its door frame that looked almost like warding signs. Scout immediately fell into step beside Eleanor, and after a moment's hesitation, I followed. Behind me, I heard Kate call out, Eleanor, are you sure? The records aren't meant for— The records, Eleanor said without turning around, are meant for exactly this situation. When the unspoken becomes undeniable, we have to face it. We entered the cabin, just Eleanor, Scout, and myself. It was dim inside, lit only by narrow windows and what little daylight could filter through. Shelves lined every wall, filled with journals, ledgers, and bound documents that looked ancient. The smell of old paper and wood smoke filled my nostrils. Eleanor moved to a locked chest in the corner, producing a key from somewhere in her clothing. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt ominous in the quiet. From inside, she withdrew a leather-bound journal so old the cover was cracked and faded. She handled it with reverence, placing it on a simple wooden table in the center of the room. "This belonged to my great-grandmother," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was one of the original founders in 1907, and in the first year they lived here, 3 children went missing." My blood ran cold. "What happened to them?" "They were found eventually, all 3, but they had no memory of where they'd been or how much time had passed. And each one, before they disappeared, reported hearing beautiful singing coming from deep in the forest." She opened the journal, and I leaned over to read the faded handwriting. August 14th, 1908. Little Margaret returned today, found sleeping at the base of an ancient oak 2 miles north. She has been missing for 5 days, yet claims only 1 night has passed. She speaks of the beautiful lady who sings, but can give no description. Dr. Weaver says she is healthy, unharmed, but something in her eyes has changed. She no longer plays with the other children. She watches the forest like she's waiting for something. September 30th, 1908. A second child, Thomas's boy Samuel, has gone missing. We heard his voice in the night, singing a melody none of us recognize. Found him at dawn, walking in circles in a clearing we have never seen before, though we know these woods intimately. He says the singing promised him beautiful things if he would follow. He seems disappointed to be home. November 2nd, 1908. The third child, my own granddaughter Rebecca, has vanished. We search desperately, but she is only 7 years old, and the forest is vast. I fear we will not find her alive. My husband says there is something old in these woods, something that was here long before us, and we have angered it by settling on its land. I do not believe in superstitions, but I cannot explain what is happening to our children. November 5th, 1908. Rebecca returned on her own this morning. She walked out of the forest at dawn, humming that same melody the others mentioned. When I asked where she had been, she smiled. My granddaughter smiled at me and said, "With the singer. She says more children will come. She says she's been lonely for so long, and now she has friends to keep her company forever." I looked up from the journal, my heart pounding. What happened after that? Did more children disappear? Eleanor nodded slowly. 2 more over the next decade. Both were found eventually, both with similar stories. And then, she flipped through the journal to a later entry, then it stopped. For 67 years, nothing. No sightings, no singing, no disappearances. We thought maybe the entity, whatever it was, had moved on. Or that perhaps our ancestors had imagined the whole thing, that the early years of settlement had been so hard that they'd created a folklore to explain ordinary accidents. "But you didn't really believe that," I said, seeing the truth in her eyes. "You kept these records because you knew it might come back." "And now it has," Eleanor confirmed. "Or perhaps it never left. Perhaps it's been sleeping, waiting, building strength. Perhaps Sophie's generation is the first in nearly 70 years to be vulnerable to whatever this thing is." Scout had been sitting quietly by the door, but at Eleanor's words, he stood and moved to the window, staring out at the forest with intense focus. A low whine escaped his throat. "Scout knows," I said, certainty flooding through me. "He's been aware of this threat the whole time. That's why he came to my window. That's why he's been agitated. He's been trying to protect Sophie, trying to protect all the children from something that none of us can see." "But dogs don't live 7 years preparing for threats," Eleanor said, voicing the impossibility we were all thinking. Unless Scout isn't just a dog, unless he's something else, something connected to these woods in ways we don't understand. I walked to the window and looked out at the settlement beyond. Children were playing again, their laughter a normal sound in an increasingly abnormal situation. Kate was holding Sophie close, both of them sitting by the fire pit, and I felt a surge of protective determination. "I need to understand what this singer is," I said. "I need to research the history of this land, any folklore or legends, any disappearances reported in these woods before your ancestors arrived. There has to be a pattern, an explanation, something we can use to—" I stopped abruptly as a thought hit me like a lightning bolt. Wait. Sophie said the singing has been calling her for a long time. But 3 weeks ago, Scout started coming to my window. 3 weeks. Not 3 months. Not 3 years. 3 weeks. What changed 3 weeks ago? What triggered this escalation? Eleanor's face went pale. "The archaeological survey," she breathed. "Thomas discovered it by accident 3 weeks ago when he was checking the northern perimeter. The state approved an archaeological survey of this section of the forest. They're planning to excavate some kind of historical site next spring." "What kind of site?" I demanded, urgency flooding my veins. "Native American burial grounds," Eleanor whispered. "They found evidence of burial grounds dating back centuries. And the survey team, they've already done preliminary work. They've disturbed the site." And just like that, all the pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. Something had been sleeping in these woods. Something old. Something tied to the burial grounds. Something that had been waiting in the dark soil for people to forget about it. And 3 weeks ago, when archaeologists started digging, they'd woken it up. "We need to stop the excavation," I said urgently. "We need to get the state to halt the project before—" A scream cut through the air outside. High, terrified, unmistakably, a child's scream. Scout exploded out the door before Eleanor or I could move, and I ran after him, my heart in my throat. The scream had come from the eastern edge of the settlement. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, dodging between buildings, aware of other community members converging on the sound. When I reached the source, I found a small girl, maybe 8 years old, standing at the tree line, pointing into the forest with a shaking hand. "I saw her," the girl sobbed as her father gathered her up. "I saw the singer. She was right there, in the trees, and she was so beautiful, but her eyes were so sad, and she was reaching for me and singing that song." "What song?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. "Can you sing it for us?" The girl's mouth opened, and the melody that came out was simultaneously the most beautiful and most unsettling sound I'd ever heard. It was wordless, ancient, full of longing and loneliness and something that sounded almost like hunger. And as the girl sang, I saw Scout's reaction, the German shepherd's entire body going rigid, his hackles raising, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. But he wasn't growling at the girl. He was growling at something I couldn't see, something standing just beyond the tree line in the shadows where sunlight couldn't quite reach, something that had followed us here, something that was no longer content to wait in the deep woods for children to wander to it, something that was coming to the settlement to claim what it believed was owed. The singer had been awakened, and she was hungry for company. We brought everyone to the central fire pit, all 32 families, every adult and child in the settlement. Eleanor called it an emergency council, something that hadn't happened in the community's recorded history. The sun was setting now, painting the clearing in shades of red and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now it just felt ominous, like the forest itself was bleeding. Kate held Sophie close on one side of the fire. On the other side, Marcus sat with his daughter, the 8-year-old who'd seen the singer. Her name was Lily, and she wouldn't stop shaking despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders and her father's arms around her frame. Tell them what you told me, Marcus said gently, and Lily's voice came out small and frightened in the evening quiet. I was just playing hide-and-seek with the others. I hid behind the woodpile near the east edge, and I thought I heard someone singing. At first, I thought it was one of the other kids, so I peeked around to see who was there, and... She swallowed hard. There was a woman standing in the trees. She was wearing a white dress that looked really old, and her hair was long and black, and she was so pretty that I couldn't look away. But her eyes were wrong. They were sad and empty and hungry all at the same time. And when she saw me looking, she smiled and started walking toward me, still singing that song, and I knew I should run, but I couldn't move. I wanted to go to her. I wanted to follow her into the forest. What stopped you? I asked gently, though I already suspected the answer. Scout, Lily said, looking at the German shepherd who lay at Eleanor's feet. Scout ran between us and barked really loud, and it was like the spell broke. The woman looked at Scout, and her face got angry, really angry, and she said something I couldn't understand. Then she just faded back into the trees, disappeared like smoke. The settlement fell into uneasy silence. Finally, Thomas spoke up, his voice tight with controlled fear. This is accelerating. Sophie was lured beyond our boundaries. Now this singer, is coming directly to our home, trying to take children in broad daylight. We're out of time. We need to evacuate, Anne said firmly. Pack what we can carry and abandon the settlement. Scatter into different towns, different states, start over somewhere else. It's what our founders planned for in case of discovery. We just never thought we'd be running from something inside the forest instead of outside authorities. No. The word came from Sophie, spoken with surprising strength for someone so small. She stood up from her mother's arms, facing the assembly with a determination that looked too old for her 5-year-old face. We can't run. The singer will just follow. She's been following me for a long time. She's in my dreams now. Even when I left the forest to climb the tree, even when Scout stayed with me, I could still hear her in my head. Distance doesn't matter to her. Kate's face went ashen. Sophie, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say, because you wouldn't believe me, Sophie said simply. You said I was imagining things, remember? So I stopped talking about it. But now everyone can hear her. Now everyone knows I wasn't making it up. The singer is real, and she wants children because she lost her own children a really, really long time ago. And she's been alone in the forest for so long that she's forgotten how to be human. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. How do you know that, Sophie? Did she tell you? Sophie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. When I was in the tree, before Scout brought you, she came to me in my sleep. She showed me things. Memories, I think. I saw her when she was alive a long time ago, before there were any houses or towns or roads. She had 3 children, and they were playing by a river, and then something happened, something bad, and they drowned, all 3 of them. And she was so sad that she followed them into death, but she couldn't find them in the afterlife. She's been stuck between worlds, searching and searching and searching, and now she thinks if she takes enough children, if she keeps enough children with her, eventually she'll find her own babies among them. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if listening to Sophie's revelation. I looked around at the faces of the community, horror, sympathy, fear, all mixed together in a complicated stew of emotions. She's a ghost, I said slowly, trying to fit this information into some kind of rational framework. Or a spirit, something that died but didn't move on. And now she's haunting these woods, collecting children in a twisted attempt to find the ones she lost. Not just any woods, Eleanor corrected quietly. The burial grounds. That's where she must be anchored. The archaeological survey disturbed the site 3 weeks ago, and they must have uncovered something connected to her. Her remains, her children's remains. something that gave her renewed power to manifest. So we report the haunting, Marcus suggested desperately. Get the state to shut down the excavation, maybe bring in paranormal investigators or priests or whoever deals with this kind of thing. And how exactly do we explain how we know about this ghost? Thomas interrupted harshly. We can't report anything without revealing our settlement. The moment we make that call, this community is finished. Then we deal with her ourselves, I heard myself say, and every eye turned to me. We find out exactly what the archaeologists disturbed. We figure out how to put this spirit to rest, and we do it quietly, without outside intervention. It's possible. There are whole fields of study about folklore, about death rites, about how different cultures handle restless spirits. I can research it. I have internet access, library cards, the ability to contact experts without raising suspicions. And what exactly do you get out of this? Thomas asked suspiciously. Why would you help us? You've got your own family, your own life. Why risk it for a community of strangers who are technically breaking multiple laws? I thought about that for a moment, trying to articulate something that had been crystallizing in my mind since I'd first followed Scout into these woods. Because Sophie's not that different from my Emma. Because your children deserve protection as much as any children in any town. And because... I looked at Scout, who was watching me with those impossibly intelligent eyes. Because sometimes you get chosen for things you don't understand. Sometimes a dog shows up at your window, and you follow him into the forest, and you find yourself standing in the middle of an impossible situation, and you realize you're the only one who can bridge two worlds. I didn't ask for this, but I'm here, so I might as well help. Eleanor nodded slowly, and I saw respect in her eyes. Then we have a plan. David researches the burial grounds, finds out what was disturbed and how to appease or banish the singer. Meanwhile, we increase our protection protocols. No child goes anywhere alone. We organize watches through the night, and... She looked at Scout. We trust that our guardian will alert us to any immediate danger. There's one more thing we need to consider, Anne spoke up hesitantly. Sophie said the singer showed her memories. That means there's some kind of psychic connection between them. Sophie might be able to sense things about the singer that we can't. She might be, I don't want to say bait, but... No, Kate said firmly, pulling Sophie close. Absolutely not. You're not using my daughter as some kind of ghost detector. But Mama, Sophie said quietly, she's already in my head. Whether we want her to be or not, she's connected to me. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can understand what she wants. She wants to steal you, Kate said, her voice breaking. That's what she wants, Sophie. Don't forget that. No matter how sad her story is, no matter how much we sympathize, she's trying to take you away from me forever. And I won't let that happen. I won't. Sophie buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and the fire crackled in the settling darkness, and I felt the weight of multiple impossible tasks settling on my shoulders. Research a century-old tragedy. Figure out how to put a vengeful spirit to rest. Keep children safe from a ghost who could apparently walk between dreams and reality, all while maintaining the secrecy of an illegal settlement and somehow keeping my wife from discovering I was entangled in something that sounded like the plot of a supernatural thriller. What would you do if you found yourself responsible for protecting an entire hidden community from a ghost? Would you run back to your safe, normal life? Or would you stay and fight something you didn't understand, armed with nothing but determination and a mysteriously intelligent dog? I pulled out my phone, still no signal this deep in the settlement, and made a mental note of everything I needed to research once I got back to civilization. Archaeological surveys, Native American burial practices in Pennsylvania, local legends about spirits or ghosts in the state forest, historical records of drownings in the area, folklore about vengeful maternal spirits across cultures. I need to go home, I said reluctantly. My wife is expecting me back, and if I stay gone too long, she'll call the police. But I'll come back tomorrow morning. Scout can lead me here again, right? Scout's tail thumped once against the ground, a clear affirmative. "Tomorrow morning, then," Eleanor agreed. "We'll prepare everything we know about the burial ground's location. And David, thank you for not running. For not immediately calling the authorities. For giving us a chance to solve this on our own terms." "Don't thank me yet," I said grimly. "We haven't solved anything. The singer is still out there, she's getting bolder, and we have no idea how to stop her. Tomorrow might bring answers, or it might bring more questions. Either way..." I looked at Sophie, at Lily, at all the children clustered close to their parents in the firelight. "We're running out of time to figure this out before someone doesn't come back." As if in response to my words, a sound drifted through the darkening forest. Faint, melodic, heartbreakingly beautiful. The singer's song, distant but clear, calling out to the children of the settlement like a siren's call. Every child's head turned toward the sound. Every child's eyes went distant and dreamy. And every parent's grip tightened in desperate fear as they watched their children begin to sway slightly, hypnotized by a melody that promised beautiful things and delivered only loss. Scout barked once, sharp and commanding, and the spell broke. The children blinked, confused, as if waking from a trance. The singing faded back into the forest's nighttime chorus of normal sounds. But we all knew the truth now. The singer wasn't giving up. She wasn't satisfied with just Sophie or just Lily. She wanted all of them. Every child in the settlement. And unless we found a way to stop her, she was going to keep calling until someone finally couldn't resist following. "Double the watches," Thomas ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "And somebody start singing. Normal songs, lullabies, anything to drown out that sound if it comes back. We're not losing anyone else tonight." As the settlement erupted into activity, parents hustling children into cabins, adults organizing patrol schedules, someone starting a folk song by the fire, I slipped away with Scout as my guide, heading back through the darkening forest toward my own home, my own family, my own world that suddenly felt like it existed on a different plane of reality entirely. The walk back seemed longer than the walk in. Or maybe it was just that every shadow looked like it might be hiding a woman in a white dress. Every rustling branch sounded like it might be the beginning of that terrible, beautiful song. I kept my flashlight pointed ahead, and I kept moving, and I tried not to think about what might be watching me from the spaces between the trees. When I finally stumbled out of the forest and onto my own property, it was like breaking through to the surface after being underwater. I could breathe again. The normal world reasserted itself, streetlights in the distance, the hum of traffic from the main road, the smell of someone's backyard barbecue. Scout sat at the tree line, waiting to make sure I got inside safely. I raised my hand in thanks, and he dipped his head once before turning and disappearing back into the forest. And I walked into my house, where Rachel was watching TV with Emma curled up beside her, and they both looked up and smiled like everything was normal, like I'd just been on a regular walk, like their husband and father hadn't just agreed to help fight a ghost in order to protect a secret community that shouldn't exist. "How was your walk?" Rachel asked. And I realized I had no idea what I'd texted her hours ago, following Scout to find his owner. Right. That was my cover story. "Interesting," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "Found his home. Nice people. He's got a big family that he looks after." Not technically a lie, just incomplete. "That's good," Rachel said, satisfied, already turning back to the TV. Emma waved at me and went back to her drawing. And I sat down on the couch beside them, wrapped my arm around my wife, and stared at the television without seeing anything on the screen, because all I could see was Sophie's face when she'd talked about the singer being in her dreams. All I could hear was that haunting melody drifting through the trees. All I could think about was how I'd walked away from children in danger, promising to come back tomorrow with research and plans, while a vengeful spirit grew stronger in the darkness. I'd been chosen for this somehow. Scout had picked my window, my family, my help. And now I had to figure out why and what I was supposed to do with that responsibility before more children heard the singing and couldn't resist following it into the forest, into the arms of a mother who'd lost everything and would take everything to fill the void. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough, but I was also terrified of what tomorrow might bring. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that melody, faint, distant, calling. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and crept downstairs to my home office, booting up my computer in the dark. Rachel thought I was dealing with a work crisis. In a way, I was. Just not the kind that involved spreadsheets and tax codes. I started with the Archaeological Survey. It took some digging through Pennsylvania state records, but I found it. A preliminary report filed 3 weeks ago by a team from the University of Pittsburgh's Anthropology Department. They'd been conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys in the state forest, looking for Native American settlements. What they'd found was more significant than expected. Evidence of what they called an extensive burial complex dating to approximately 1650 to 1750 CE, likely belonging to a displaced Lenape community forced westward during early colonial expansion. The report included coordinates. I cross-referenced them with topographical maps of the area, and my stomach sank. The burial site was less than half a mile from the settlement's northern boundary, close enough that Sophie could have wandered there in her trance-like state, close enough that disturbing it would have woken anything that slept there. But here's what made my blood run cold. Buried in the appendix of the report was a note about unusual findings during initial test excavations. The team had uncovered the remains of what appeared to be a family unit, an adult female and 3 juveniles, all buried together in a manner that suggested simultaneous death, possibly by drowning given the presence of river sediment in the grave soil. A mother and 3 children who drowned, just like Sophie had described in her vision. The singer's family. I kept reading. The bones had been carefully removed for laboratory analysis, tagged and cataloged, and taken away from the place they'd rested for nearly 300 years. The report mentioned plans to return them to the site after study, working with local Lenape tribal authorities to ensure respectful reburial. But the damage was already done. The singer had been disturbed, separated from her children's remains, and now she was frantically searching for them in the only way she knew how, by collecting living children to replace the ones she'd lost. I researched Lenape death traditions, burial practices, beliefs about the afterlife. What I found was complicated and beautiful and utterly tragic. The Lenape believed that the dead needed guidance to reach the afterlife, that improper burial or disturbance of remains could trap a spirit in the world of the living. They had ceremonies for this, songs and rituals to help restless spirits find peace. But those traditions had been disrupted by centuries of displacement and cultural genocide. The knowledge had been scattered, diluted, in many cases lost entirely. Would modern Lenape tribal authorities even know the specific rituals needed for this situation? Would they believe me if I contacted them? "Hi, there's a 300-year-old ghost haunting a secret illegal settlement in state forest because archaeologists dug up her family," sounded insane even in my own head. At 6:30 a.m., I gave up on research and got ready to go back to the settlement. Rachel was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. She looked at me with concern. "You okay, honey? You look exhausted." "Just worried about work stuff," I lied, hating myself for it. "Complex case. Might need a few more days to sort out." She kissed my forehead. "Don't work yourself to death over someone else's tax problems. They're not worth your health." If only she knew. This wasn't about taxes. This was about life and death, children's lives, specifically. But I couldn't tell her that without explaining everything, and explaining everything would either make her think I'd lost my mind or drag her into danger alongside me. "I love you," I said instead, holding her tight for a moment longer than normal. She pulled back, searching my face. "David, "Are you sure you're okay? You're acting strange." "I'm fine," I lied again. "Just tired. I'll be better once I get this sorted out." At 6:47 a.m. Exactly, Scout appeared at the kitchen window. Right on schedule, like clockwork, like he'd been doing for 3 weeks. But now I understood why. He'd been preparing me, training me to recognize his signal, getting me ready for the moment I'd need to follow him into crisis. "Your friend is back," Rachel said, noticing the German shepherd. "I thought you said you found his owner yesterday." "I did. He just likes to check in, I guess. I'm going to walk him back home again, make sure everything's okay." The lies were getting easier, which somehow made them worse. "You've got a good heart," Rachel said, smiling at me. "Most people wouldn't bother." I grabbed my jacket and headed outside, where Scout was waiting with that now familiar look of urgent intelligence. The moment I stepped into the yard, he took off toward the forest, and I followed, already mentally preparing for whatever awaited me at the settlement. The walk was faster this time. I knew the path now, could navigate the hidden trail without Scout having to wait for me to catch up. We reached the settlement as the morning sun was just beginning to filter through the canopy. Painting made me think of you and Scout. I laughed, ruffling her hair. "I'm glad you're getting to experience both worlds, Sophie. You deserve to make informed choices when you're older." "I think I'll stay in the forest," Sophie said thoughtfully. "But it's nice to know what else is out there. Makes the forest feel like a choice instead of a prison." Kate smiled at me, her earlier hostility completely gone. "You changed our whole community, David. Not just by saving us legally, but by showing us that we don't have to be afraid of the outside world. That we can engage with it on our own terms. Take what works and leave what doesn't. It's a better way to live." I thought about that as I drove home later, about balance, about choice, about the way communities evolve when they stop seeing the world in binary terms of us versus them and start seeing it as a spectrum of possibilities. Rachel noticed the change in me over those 6 months. I was more confident, more purposeful, more willing to take on challenges that seemed impossible at first glance. She didn't know the real reason why, couldn't know without me sounding insane, but she seemed happy with the evolution. "You found something," she said one night as we lay in bed. "I don't know what it is, but you seem more complete somehow. More like the person you were always meant to be." She was right. I had found something. A purpose beyond spreadsheets and tax codes. A calling to bridge worlds, to help people who existed on the margins, to solve problems that required both practical skills and an openness to the impossible. And it all started with a dog at a window. Pause. Years have passed since then. The forest stewardship community thrives, living in harmony with both the forest and the modern world. Sophie grew up to become the community's official liaison to outside authorities, the perfect role for someone who understands both worlds. The singer never returned. She and her children found peace at last. And Scout? Scout still watches over the community, still protects the children, still shows up occasionally at my window when something important needs attention. He's become something of a local legend, the mysterious German shepherd who appears when needed and disappears when the crisis is over, like a furry guardian angel with too much intelligence in his eyes. I've helped the community with several other issues over the years: legal challenges, resource management, mediation with state authorities. Each time, Scout appears to guide me, to show me what's needed, to remind me that some people choose me for purposes I might not understand immediately, but will eventually fulfill. My daughter Emma is a teenager now. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell her the truth about the hidden community in the forest, about the ghost we put to rest, about the guardian spirit who watches over those who live between worlds. But maybe she'll discover it herself one day. Maybe Scout will show up at her window when the time is right, when there's a new crisis that requires a new bridge between worlds. Until then, I keep the walking stick the community gave me in my office. A reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're called to do so, when they're willing to follow mysterious dogs into impossible situations, when they're willing to believe that magic exists in the spaces between the modern world and the wild places we've forgotten. And every morning at 6:47 a.m., I glance at my kitchen window. Most days, it's empty. Scout is busy with his eternal vigil, watching over the children who live in the forest, protecting them from threats both natural and supernatural. But sometimes, just sometimes, he's there, sitting patiently, dark eyes fixed on mine, waiting to see if I'll follow him into the woods one more time. And every single time, I do. Because that's what you do when you've been chosen by a guardian spirit, when you've been given the gift of seeing beyond the ordinary into the extraordinary. When you understand that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest questions. What does that dog want? Deep breath. The answer, I've learned, is always the same. He wants to show you something impossible, something that will change your life forever, something that will remind you that magic isn't dead. It's just hiding in the forest, waiting for someone brave enough to follow a mysterious dog into the unknown. And if you ever see a German shepherd at your window, staring at you with eyes that hold too much knowledge, with an expression that says, "I need your help," follow him. Trust me. Follow him into the forest, into the mystery, into the impossible. Because on the other side of that journey, you'll find purpose, meaning, and the truest version of yourself you never knew existed. That's what Scout taught me. That's what the hidden community showed me. That's what the singer's story revealed to me. We're all searching for connection, for meaning, for a place where we belong. Some of us find it in ordinary lives. Others find it in hidden forests, in guardian spirits, in stories that shouldn't be true but are. And the luckiest among us? We find it by building bridges between those worlds, by helping others find peace, by answering the call when it comes. Even if it comes in the form of a dog at a window, waiting patiently for you to notice, to wonder, to follow.